my pleasure to introduce you all to Alejandro. Alejandro is going to be here starting September as a postdoc. We realized that Alejandro and I, we overlapped in a bunch of different places in the world. So we both did a summer at EPFL internship at some point at EPFL. We were both interns at Microsoft where we met in Redmond. And now we're both at Princeton, right? So that's great. Alejandro is doing amazing research on privacy and security for topics that I think are very relevant for CITP folk in general. Something I really appreciated about his work is how willing he is to put himself in the shoes of the exact situation that's going on. He calls this gonzo research, which I find it very appealing. And this work I think is a great example of this work he's going to present. So it's about kind of like people buying and selling YouTube accounts. And it all started with his kind of like in-depth investigation of some super dodgy marketplaces for selling this kind of accounts. And I think that really there's this untapped potential in trying to explore this intersection between social media, content creation, and misbehavior that I'm very excited to explore with Alejandro, along with countless other things. So let's thank the speaker, and I'm looking very much forward for this talk.
Thank you, everybody. I'm sure that the weather outside is not super appealing, and the campus is, not super nice and green, that you guys are choosing to spend, your time here in a windowless conference room, and there's not even food, which is crazy, I am just deeply thankful for all you being here. I also know that the semester, is over, and I will do my best to give you an entertaining talk, a talk that totally was not finished, earlier this morning. I think I'm staring at a lot of PhD and master students, so a lot of y'all can relate. I wanted to know if anybody here is in security and privacy or publishes in those type of venues. Just to know a little bit how much I can name drop, but it's looking like name dropping isn't really not going to buy me anything. So
me here is in security. Okay. You're published in that.
Yeah. Okay, I'll do some name dropping then, I guess, as I go through the literature and so on. But yeah, the title is a little bit misleading, and we'll get into why for a second. But today we're really going to be talking about these YouTube accounts that people buy and sell. And I think, as you may have seen in the abstract, it looks very simple. But I think we're going to be seeing that there's a little bit of some fishy stuff going on. This work is also ongoing, so Manuel and I have been working on this for a few months, and he's been sharing sort of some of the inside perspective on this universe. So I really want this presentation to be a little bit more collaborative. It can be a discussion. You can ask questions throughout it. You can interrupt me. I'm going to mostly gloss over some methodological details in favor of more shock value. But if you would still like to ask me about sampling procedures and things like that, feel free to be that. I won't think of you as a snob. So let's get started. I figure that because I'm coming here in the fall, this is also a good opportunity to sort of give you a bit of a flavor of not only what informed this work, but also the work that I've been doing over the past couple of years since I started my PhD. And as Manuel described it, I've been calling this sort of gonzo research, which is very nicer way of saying ethnographic work, work that you do sort of putting yourself in the shoes inside a community, and sort of you seek to sort of document and understand the community that you're part of. And I started this work because in my lab, which is a cybercrime lab, we were doing a lot of work measuring marketplaces. So something that I didn't mention at the beginning of my talk, which I should have mentioned, is that I'm a PhD candidate at CMU, advised by Nicolas Christin. And sort of his claim to fame was studying this marketplace called Silk Road, which was one of the most prolific or most notorious marketplaces that came to exist in this shady world called the dark web. And all this work that was focused on measuring revenue is some work that a PhD student before me continued, and then I came in and continued it in 2019. So it's like 3 generations of marketplace work. But when I was doing this work, I also found the underground community sort of evolving. So it was no longer just marketplaces where people bought and sold drugs and malware and things like that, but there was a host of other offerings that were coming to be. So this is one of the things that has been informing this work and the work that I've been doing over the past couple of years. Deeply interlinked, for very obvious reasons, is also the cryptocurrency community, which we studied. I was very interested in sort of cryptocurrency finfluencers earlier in the 2020s. And we had this really nice data set where we could sort of see what people were saying on Twitter and how they were trading. And as you may have guessed, the advice that you get on Twitter about what to invest on is not very reliable. And we were able to show this very nice quantitatively, but sort of being immersed in this cryptocurrency world and this world of influencers was very good perspective as well on sort of some of the shadier things that are happening on the internet. I also am currently, since the past year, Emmanuel mentioned, I was an internet MSR, and since the fall, I have a research consulting position with special projects there. And I was brought in to give some of a security and privacy perspective on this Gen AI misuse or potential for misuse that was speculated to happen last year, right? Like last year, there were so many elections around the world, and people were really concerned that Gen AI was going to be used to sway political decision-making. Misinformation was going to wreak havoc on democracy as we know it. And we have some interesting work in this part, but something that was very, very interesting to me was how people were thinking about how this sort of Gen AI misinformation was going to be spread and sort of disseminated across the world. Because one of the areas where we see this dissemination is social media, and we'll see a little bit about how potentially we can get an insight on how Gen AI misinformation is happening in social media. And then, unrelated to research in general, but very related research to the research that I've been doing, is that I have a fragrance brand that I co-founded with my co-founder, which came to my talk to support me. It's called Redo. And we've been working on this fragrance brand for several years. And 6 years. Well, yeah. 6 years in the summer, yes. And so this gives me sort of a perspective on how, when we were trying to grow this brand and we were doing marketing, how to contract influencers and how we go about pricing influence deals and what this ecosystem looked like, which I'm going to elaborate in a second. I swear it makes sense, and this is not just for clout. But as I was telling you, this sort of like press perspective and how we go about finding press and cultivating this organically also gave us a perspective on how people were not doing it organically and how people were using some more deceptive practices to grow their brands. So all these things, the uniting theme among all of this is online reputation, which has been the subject of my PhD, and I've been trying to see how online reputation is primarily abused and people do bad things with their perceived online reputation. And so what we're going to really be talking about today, to show you that all these things tie together, is how people trade social media reputation in underground markets to, among many things, peddle cryptocurrency scams and political misinformation, which, as you see, ties everything very nicely. Let's start with a little bit of the marketing landscape. I was saying, for instance, let's say you have a brand, a fragrance brand at that, and you're trying to grow your brand and sort of do marketing so that you can sell more products. Some of the verticals that you typically will explore, especially as a direct-to-consumer brand, are paid ads, which will, social media ads, PR, which will get you sort of like Forbes appearances, GQ, Vanity Fair, whatever you wish. SEO, which is just ranking higher on Google. And then content creators, or as other people sometimes call them, influencers. I'm going to make a little bit of a distinction. When I say influencers, I'm mostly going to be talking about people with influence on social media, but who have an identity associated to their influence. And when I say content creators more broadly, I will just be referring to accounts that post content, get audience, and sort of get engagement, but are not necessarily associated with an identity. So, as I was saying, content creators will be the focus of this talk, and I also wanted to give you a perspective on content creation from the perspective of my dear co-founder who is here, who is also a content creator. And so typically two of the verticals that you have to do this content creation would be to monetize it with a third party, and this would be a brand coming to you, for instance, our brand coming to a content creator and saying, hey, we will pay you some amount of money for you to have sponsored content, to post about our products or do something along those lines. I'm sure you have all seen this across your feeds, or you can also monetize it yourself. You can do sort of ads in the content that you're running on TikTok, or you can potentially sell products or services in the platform itself. What these two verticals have in common is that you are really working to cultivate an audience. So what you're ending up creating value for you as a content creator is the audience that you have, the audience's attention that you have. And so when a brand reaches out to you and says, hey, we would like to pay you for you to post this much content on your feed at this regular intervals and so on, what really they're looking for in making those negotiations is, what does your audience look like? Who is part of your audience? What are your audience's demographics? What does your engagement look like? And so on and so forth. And as a creator, you leverage that audience to sort of price what you should be charging the brand. Now, that's what a good sort of negotiation or in theory would go. A lot of places, I'm from Paraguay originally, where there's not as much consideration of what the audience in itself would look like. You still have agencies that come to you and say, okay, how many followers you have? Oh, okay, if you have more than 50K followers, these are our rates. And if you have more than 100K followers, these are our rates. And it's very sort of just raw metrics driven. So it's important, what I want you to take away from here is that cultivating the attention of an audience has a lot of value, and the characteristics also of your audience end up mattering a lot in how you monetize that audience. Now, later, depending on the types of content that you produce and the types of ways that you're trying to monetize, they all are sort of predicated on what your audience looks like. And when I say that, I mean that if you're, trying to sell cryptocurrency services and so on, the types of audiences that you will search or want will be a little bit different, and you may have some more difficulties when you are trying to monetize it because of the monetization abilities that you will have access to. Let me just make sure I have time in front of me, because this is not in my screen. So this paradigm, of course, has made influencer agencies, pop out everywhere. And so when you don't talk about the underground world, what this, going about finding an influencer could look like is that you go and find an influencer agency, somebody that has a portfolio of influencers or content creators that they work with, and who is sort of the intermediary between you and a network of audiences, right? And there's many, many such agencies that exist. They will all offer very similar things, and they compete with each other in type of maybe metrics that they give you access to, analytics, and again, the audiences that they have access to. Now, when we talk about the underground communities, you can find a lot of these things as well. And you can find a lot of other surprising things. For instance, you can see here that you can buy a full USA Very Active Spirituality Memes Niche Facebook page. And by the title, you can already see sort of what are some of the key markers of what's driving this, how this person is going to try to sell you this account. There's first and foremost the number of subscribers, but then the niche that you're in, the platform, and in this case, some verification and the demographics of the audience, or the geography in this case. Other ones that I found really interesting are sort of this finance subreddit with 600,000 members. You can de-index or delete article from Bing search, Reddit posts with upvote services, Discord servers with members, and so on. One of my favorites that I keep seeing is you can buy yourself a Forbes press release, which has been, a great thing to have in slides. And this doesn't necessarily look all, there's all these services directly being sold, but in a lot of other places you will also find sort of these tools and sort of more technical things that you can use, such as this Bumblebot plus AI for OnlyFans. And so the idea is that you sort of will have an agent swiping on Bumble that then will try to direct to an OnlyFans content creator. And you have an auto-like engagement, likes, views, commenter tool, auto DM, follow, and so forth. So there's a lot of very varied, yes.
Yeah, have you ever found like one recent niche that I found is like people, like I think that especially kind of like for tech companies, like I was seeing this on Blind, which is this like tech thing.
Yeah.
There's this market for buying publications.
Right. Like scientific publications?
Scientific publications, because this qualifies, for instance, if you're like a Facebook employee or something, this qualifies you for like kind of like academic visas, right?
Huh.
Like I wonder if like if
They
that,
probably exist.
if it's on that marketplace, because I was thinking of like that. Yeah, sorry.
These are just screenshots I took on Saturday. I opened it and I was like, I need screenshots for my talk, and I was like, these are always super interesting. But these don't only happen in forums, they also happen on Telegram, and so you have channels where people are sort of selling things and posting screenshots and sort of trying to negotiate with you something that they want you to, they want to sell you, or something to access. In general, this has been really hard to study. So, back in my day before LLMs, if you wanted to study these, and you would have to do it with like some other language model, and you'll try to sort of get insights from these forums, and it would be a nightmare. Today, the job is a little bit easier, but still, you can get a sense of what's being sold and whatnot, but really getting insight of, is this getting sold or is this not getting sold, is always really hard. And so in the security and privacy community, you always have reviewer B saying, okay, these are all advertised, but are they actually getting sold? Are people actually buying these things? How can you prove that these people are actually buying these things? And that's really hard, So for a lot of times, for a long time, research on forums and whatnot has been tried to find a way to be published, but it's always really hard to attribute what these things that are being offered from actual transactions and what happens afterwards. But luckily, there's the market pressures these platforms usually to evolve and become more frictionless. So luckily, we have seen, luckily for my research, we have seen an emergence of markets that sort of try to streamline this process. And so instead of having sort of forums where you have to DM somebody and then try to figure out how they cannot scam you and who's going to be your third party that will serve as escrow and so on, you have now these platforms that are trying to sort of mitigate all these, all this friction, right? And so you've seen an emergence of sort of these platforms. And what's really nice, especially, is that these platforms first started, when I started looking at them, they wouldn't actually give you the YouTube channel. So they would just tell you, I have this YouTube channel with these many subscribers and so on. Still DM me and we'll figure out, I can maybe give you access to what the actual channel is. Again, the market pressures have made it such that the functionality to directly link the channel has appeared recently, which has helped our measurement efforts. Now, as you can see also in this channel, you have a lot of rich information. You have prices for each of these accounts. You have reputation systems and these upvotes. One of them even has a phone verified. Recently, I saw that they introduced an address verification as well. And they usually provide escrow services. So the way that these platforms make money is that they act as a reputable third party. And so you send them money and they hold the money. And then once there's an agreement that the transaction took place, they sort of like release the funds to the person that needs to receive the funds. Great. Also, something to note, one of these marketplaces, the one on the bottom, is actually the one that we'll be studying. This was first mentioned, I think, in Usenix 2023, and they were like a footnote that the authors were looking at dark monetization patterns on YouTube, and they were looking at forums and whatnot, and they casually mentioned this place and did this small measurement of how many listings existed in this market. And at the time, it was only about like 3,000, and since then to now, this has grown 10x. So the number of listings in just this one platform has increased substantially. So these markets are really gaining traction in their offerings and the demand also for these accounts. So when we look at the subscriber counts of what's being offered, one of the first questions that I get is like, okay, surely these accounts are, small, 1K, 2K type of accounts. What does it, like they must not have a lot of reach. And when you see actually the distribution of the subscriber counts, you see that you have some really big accounts. Like here, this would be like over 2 million, an account with over 2 million followers, an account with over 1.5 million. We have a few dots in the 1 million, and then you have a lot more in the 500K type of range, where if you zoom in, you have all the way down over these subscriber counts in this sort of like yes.
Sorry, just a clarifying question. Are these accounts that like, it's somebody's account and they're like, you can take it over, or is it like everybody who follows this account is a bot? I'm not quite clear on
so
how.
phenomenal. I'm glad that we are sort of like addressing the elephant in the room. Conventional knowledge, or at least, when I talk to somebody like my advisor, and I tell him, hey, there's these accounts with like 1 million followers. They're like, they're probably all bots. And that's kind of been sort of the conventional knowledge on what this or the following for these accounts. So later I'll show you some screenshots too that seem to indicate that the traction that they have is more organic. And what's happening is people trying to indeed harvest content with real audiences, because that's where the value comes in. The sort of meta argument that I've been thinking a lot for a while, and this is really source equals me, but I hope it makes a lot of sense, is that these markets wouldn't be operating still today if they were just rife with fraud. There's probably some amount of fraud happening, but some people seem to be deriving enough value from these markets such that they continue to exist until this point. It's very hand-wavy, I know, but sorry.
Well, but just like the accounts that are being sold, like, are they created by the people who are selling them, and then those people have been cultivating them for a while? Like, where are they coming from?
I think there is people that are indeed cultivating accounts and then selling them. I have an example, it certainly looks that way. That is not to say that some of these accounts may have inorganic followers, or like artificial followers, for the purpose of inflating the metrics. That could totally happen. I think there is enough like organic content also happening. And one of the interesting ways I think that you can see this is that when you look at the price per 1,000 subscribers and how these accounts are being priced, you have in some niches that you have almost $100 per 1K of followers in a given account. When you look at marketplaces on what people would currently charge you for artificial subscribers, that's significantly less, right? Like it's only about like $7 per 1K. It makes me believe that there is a notion that these audiences are not only difficult to cultivate, right? Like they're harder than just artificial bots, but that there's like some expected value on how these are priced, such that is substantially higher than what just inorganic followers would cost you, right? Otherwise, if they were pretty similar, you would think that kind of like their price maybe would be closer. Again, still I'm waiting.
Yeah, like I wonder if like the person who buys the account, because the person who buys the account, they have access, or they could have access to the YouTube the YouTube ratings, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's very evident. Like if I look at someone's YouTube kind of like panel, content creation panel, you have the click-through rate. and you have the purchase, like you have the percentage of people that have bought an ad, right? That have clicked an ad and made a purchase, for example. So you have all these metrics, and I think it would be very easy to find out. Like, I think that would be another argument, right? Like, where like, basically if you have access, given that these tools are heavily incentivized to provide tools for the creators, the creators themselves can look at whether their revenue makes sense or does not make sense. For example, I know on Instagram that like, if you're a creator, they always ask you for like your engagement metrics, and there's like a ways of extracting this and showing this. So like, even if you bought a lot of followers, if you're the person who's trying to sell you the ad is kind of clever, it would actually work against you, because they would say, okay, you have like 10 million followers, but like when you post something like 50 people like it, like that's weird, right? So I think that in YouTube you have the same thing, but it's tracked to the amount of like click-through rate, right? And the ads that they show. Yeah, I think on Instagram, I think everyone converges to the same thing. So I wonder if this is also something that an skilled buyer will very easily verify from just like the screenshots that they would have to send from the the content creation pen.
Yeah, you know, you could argue again that you could forge all these screenshots and whatnot, but there's some amount, like these markets have made it such that there's some amount of due diligence that you can do in advance, and I think maybe there's some tolerance of the trade-off between inorganic and organic followers and how you do that calculation. From looking at these accounts on the regular, it does seem like there is really a business of sort of farming content. Like they put out content regularly and trying to really go viral. And so there's a little bit of also, you can observe a little bit of the sophistication when we talk about the usage of AI, for instance, about the lengths that people go to try to make content generation easier and the type of content that they try to put out. Another thing that you didn't mention, but it's also important to address, is that some people think that these are accounts that are hijacked, so that you just hack these accounts and then you sell them. Very well could be the case, very hard to verify. It's very opaque to know what happens if you're a content creator and your account gets compromised, and the degree to what YouTube service is going to do to help you get access back to your account. There are some mechanisms to go around it. So I guess what I can say there is that it doesn't seem like it, because there's a clear sort of transition for a lot of these channels that go from doing one thing to doing to another, to believe that they are just getting hacked and resold, I guess. But yeah, could happen. Okay, so as I mentioned, you have sort of these channel IDs now, thankfully, through the markets, and the very easy sort of measurement task is to collect all these IDs and to start scraping them and sort of seeing when they change from one account to the other. So what does this change actually look like? So fortunately, in late 2022, YouTube introduced these thing called handles. And so the handle is sort of like the main thing that connects, that they use to find an account. And there are these handles that are easily identifiable names for YouTube accounts, but there's also these things that we'll call canonical URLs. So essentially, a channel has sort of this unique 24-digit identifier that you can use to access it, and that remains constant, even though a handle may change. Handle changes are not very common. You would think that if you're an honest content creator, there's not a lot of incentive for you to change your handle, especially if you've been cultivating a reputation for doing, content on fragrances, that you would not have a clear incentive to change from fragrances to cars, right? But we see that for some subset accounts, especially accounts that are being sold, they regularly go from their previous handle to their new handle when they get sort of repurposed. And we can track sort of these changes by scraping them by their unique identifier that stays constant. So to do this, I figured it would be also interesting to show you how I go about looking at these channels. And so Manuel is familiar with this, but how to create sort of these markdown documents that have the snapshots that we get from a given YouTube channel and all their videos that we are able to get over some period of time. And I go and sort of like look at each of these markdown documents and try to understand what the heck is going on. And sort of like by looking at different snapshots of these accounts. Why? Because this landscape is very ephemeral. Something that you see today, you open YouTube again like a week from now, it may no longer be there. And so you have to sort of constantly be scraping them and sort of constantly reconciling these multiple views of how this channel looked like at different points in time. And so here, for instance, you have a channel that at the moment where I took the screenshot or generated this document was about a DJ called Daddy Spot. He's a dynamic and innovative DJ known for blending hip hop, electronic, so on and so forth. At that moment, in the most recent timestamp, he only had one video up and 8 views on that one video. But if you had looked and found this account when it was advertised for sale, you have all these other sort of completely unrelated videos, such as bubble experiment, water bubbles experiment, hashtag shorts, trending, rainbow experiment, and so on and so forth. Completely unrelated, I would think, to DJ and music production. Anything that you see with gray thumbnail, by the way, means that the video has been deleted. And anything that's not at the time that the markdown document was created means that it was still up. So you can kind of also see what has been deleted and what has stayed. And you can also see for this one channel, for instance, they have a couple of YouTube videos that had substantial number of views, 5 million, 5 million, almost 1 million over there, and a lot of small ones, 4K, 3K, 3K, whatever, that they decided to delete. Maybe potentially because they're generating a lot of content, see what sticks, what the algorithm picks up, what is amplified, and what's not is just sort of delisted. Okay, I was very interesting then when looking at sort of these qualitatively going through a sample of these accounts on some categories that kept emerging. One of these categories was financial content, which would involve sort of like cryptocurrencies. Another will be like investing, e-commerce, make money online, digital marketing, and so on, as well as casinos and sports betting. So these kept reappearing. There's also ideological content, sort of like religious content, political content, content that looked like a news website, and also this sort of manosphere, red pill angle, sort of like Joe Rogan cuts or Jordan Peterson, all these kind of stuff that kept appearing. And there was also another sort of set of categories related to like AI generation. So you see accounts trying to generate content with AI. Now, these types of content are not necessarily forbidden by community guidelines. It just depends on how much misinformation or scamminess there is to it, right? So if you can advertise a cryptocurrency or talk about cryptocurrencies, but if it's a meme coin, it starts being a little bit more gray, and if it's like an investment opportunity, it's definitely more not allowed. Casinos are also very heavily regulated, and political content and this type of news content, it really depends on the type of flavor of the information that is in there. Now, unfortunately, I didn't have copious amounts of hours to look through all these videos, so I had to purely rely on textual descriptions, so titles and descriptions of these videos to sort of get a sense of what's going on. And by going through this process and sort of like developing a code book for each of these categories would be, I then train or use an LLM to label a bunch of videos. Yes?
Could you like also scrape the transcript from the videos?
Yes. For a lot of them, you can.
Yeah.
It is something I consider doing. And at this stage, I think for a lot of the things that we have, which are like more visual, like water bubble experiment, like it would not necessarily still capture a lot of it. For the political stuff, definitely.
Yeah.
Something that I want to do, but not just done yet. But it will be very interesting.
You could also do, I guess, now the whole video summarization. I was just thinking.
Yeah, no, totally. No, yeah. I think it would be really interesting. And I think it's really important to do because I found that political information comes in a lot of flavors. Right now, I'm just labeling, are there any videos with some form of political information across all? So it's really just 1 or 0. But something that Manuel and I were discussing is that you have these channels that have like, it's a talk show about, I don't know, a waterway in Pittsburgh, right?
Yeah.
And that can be considered political, and it can be considered like a news-related video, but it's not the same as a video talking about like the India-Pakistan conflict that is ongoing, right? That maybe is a lot more politically charged. So transcript analysis would be really good to do, but I haven't done it. So when we look at just like appearance of these topics across the set of videos that we're looking at, and these were the FameSwap channels that sort of were something before and then changed to something afterwards, so about 1,600 accounts. You find a modest amount of appearance of these topics across the spectrum. It's definitely not the case that all these accounts that are being sold are being used to peddle misinformation or scams and so on. They're being used for a lot of reasons. For instance, that DJ account that I showed you, I can show you the appendix later, currently is an AI company's YouTube channel. So there's a lot of things that these accounts are being used for. They are used to gain credibility for a company. They're being used to sort of like monetize an audience in a different way. You know, maybe you go from memes to then like pharmaceutical products, or you go from memes to celebrity stuff, and then you try to monetize it in a different way. So there's a lot of quote unquote innocuous stuff happening. Nonetheless, some proportion of these accounts are still being used to advertise online casinos, cryptocurrency investments, political stuff, news stuff, and so on and so forth. So as you can see, between 5 to 15 and almost 20% of the accounts that we see. And when we look at sort of a survivability of these accounts, whether they're getting suspended or not, they are not really getting suspended, right? So from the observation period, which is about like late November last year to current present day as of like yesterday evening, we have about only 10% or so of channels that have been suspended by YouTube. And a lot of them are just living and going on their merry way. Another interesting thing that I found is sort of there's these different patterns of what activity of these channels look like. So for instance, this account was previously, posting about travel videos, and then they became sort of this Kafkas, which means Caucasus, blog news, which is potentially associated with a website called Kafka Center, which is about, looks like a disinfo outlet. I can show you some screenshots, but it's just kind of not doing anything. It transformed, it has 7K subscribers, and it's just dormant. At some point, it may start doing something. Right now, it's not, and it's just radio silence. Then you have channels in transition. So you have sort of this account that became Gossip Flow, and it's about celebrity news. But before, it had just mainly Quranic readings, and so there's a brief period in time where you can see sort of they haven't delisted all their previous videos, and they have the new videos up. And so they're sort of in transition, so to say, right? Which is really interesting. Why this is doing this, I have no idea. I can only be the messenger so far.
Seems like a horrible adaptation.
Right,
To be honest.
it really seems like it makes no sense, right? Who knows? And then there are already fully reused channels. So this is a channel that, again, I came across over the weekend because I was looking for examples for the talk today. So notice the URL at the top. And so this channel is just called Next News Up. And so what you can see is that a lot of the recent videos, again, are really about this Pahalgam, Kashmir conflict happening in between India and Pakistan. And they're putting a lot of shorts out. And they also have some other channels that they seem like they own. Funnily enough, their own personal channel is still under construction, and so if you visit their website, it has like nothing important. It's really just like a template. So I think they're still finding their rhythm. but they're putting content like crazy, yeah. What was this channel before? When we look at the Wayback Machine, back in 2022, it had 174 subscribers, and it was Ahmed Raza edits, which were just like, I think, I cannot really tell you what these are about, except that they have a punching, angry emoji, maybe some potential political information. I'll partially this out. In 2023, it had about 20,000 subscribers. Hence why also, when I look at these type of channels, I think that there's just not necessarily just inorganic stuff happening, because you can see sort of a progression of them through the years, sort of slowly building their audience. And then when you look at them in 2025, you see that they are something completely different, have a lot more subscribers and so on. Okay, so I wanted to see sort of what this looked like when they were dormant or advertised for sale, and sort of what happened afterwards. So I sort of grabbed all the channels and put them at T0. T0 being when they had a channel handle change. And what did they look before like in terms of their subscriber count, and what did they look after? And what you can see is that once somebody sort of potentially buys this channel and repurposes this channel, you see sort of this growth in subscribers, which leads you to believe that they start sort of putting out content, or they start sort of like doing something with the channel other than it was done before, up to the sale, where the channel is just kind of not doing anything and it's just waiting for a buyer to take it over. Okay, now I've been talking a lot about buying and selling channels, but what this really, what I was really hoping to elicit in all of you, that what we really care about is this repurposing of channels, right? There's this concept in security about residual trust, and it's often applied to domains and URLs, right? That if you go to google.com, you have an expectation of what google.com is associated to, especially if you have some software packages that depend on some domain that you're pulling from some dependencies, that domain is going to have what you expect it to have. And there's work that has been done in terms of how people abuse residual trust on URLs for a few years now. There was Patrick by Daniel at Penn State, and then I think there's some Stony Brook folks that followed up on it. And so this residual trust notion is very well applied in this context. And for us, we're thinking of the handles really as kind of like a domain as well. And the residual trust that comes from what you expect that domain to have and what you encounter it later after it has changed to something else. So we have put forward a bit this definition of channel being repurposed if it has significantly changed its identity. And in this case, we're really thinking about the title of the account or the channel, the handle that they had, and the description of the channel. And if you cannot link in any way the content, category, description, URLs, and so on of a channel with a previous identity, we would consider it to be repurposed. And we're really interested in finding these repurposed channels in the wild. Now, the reason we look at channels for sale is because a sale is potentially very correlated with channels being repurposed. So we think that these two sets would overlap. And in particular, we would think that it will overlap with our fame swap sample. That's why we sort of take this starting point and we say, okay, what can we learn from these buying accounts that are being bought and sold, and what can we learn about how people repurpose channels? So something slightly more ambitious we're trying to do is, okay, can we sort of estimate how prevalent this is in the wild, right? And to do that, we rely on this platform called Social Blade, which Manuel collected. So Social Blade is an analytics platform. As you can see, for YouTube, they have over 68 and right now over 69 million channels that they have indexed. And their whole sort of value prop is that they serve you sort of like analytics about channels so that you can potentially find content creators or do these type of deals with them. And if you assume that Social Blade is representative of YouTube, you get some nice properties, but we can assume that it's not. But at least we can take a representative sample of social blade, right? And I tried to do that, so I collected about 1.4 million randomly sampled channels from the social blade data set. And the hope was, okay, can we sort of find these sort of repurposed channels from this other side, right? And if we can sort of estimate how prevalent it is in a randomly sample, we can say something about at least the set of channels from social blade, right? And you have this intersection as well, of course, with the famous sub-channel. Again, note none of these figures are at scale. You 1.4 million and 5.5K, but it creates this nice little Venn diagram intersection in the middle, which I was really proud of. And what we know, at least from these samples, is that we know these three yellow stars, these three intersections here, we can measure, we can know by just intersecting our data sets. And what we're really trying to sort of say something about are these two red stars here, right? Like the set of all social blade channels, right? And yeah, so what we did here was trying to say, okay, from these 1.4 million channels collected in January, one snapshot, and a second snapshot collected end of March, early April, how many of these accounts can we find that were repurposed in the wild? And so we look at all these URL handle changes, and then we do a classification basically on all the titles, handles, descriptions, and videos to see how dissimilar they are from each other, right? If they meet our criteria for repurposing. And what we find is that about 0.36% of all these accounts were repurposed, which was really interesting. And in these repurposed accounts, we were also able to find some accounts that were being sold on other marketplaces, but were not in our initial FameSwap sample, for instance, which was pretty cool to see in this transition period. Now, what you need to know is that this 0.36%, what that means is just from a snapshot that we took in January and a snapshot that we took early April for this size of data sets, or for this size of channels, right? So you kind of have to think of this as this prevalence as a moving scale, right? Like what would then be the prevalence from another month with another measurement interval and so on and so forth. But this at least gives you a sense of the scale of like what may be happening in the wild. So this would be about 3,600 accounts or so, which was very nice and very cool to find. We then, using this reference sample, also wanted to look as a baseline, sort of taking a sample from that sample. We took like 3,000 accounts and they said, okay, let's label a randomly selected subsample in these categories that we were measuring on FameSwap to see just how prevalent some of these categories are in the wild, right? And so as you can see, you know, cryptocurrency, financial, gambling, manosphere stuff are all more present in sort of our FameSwap sample than in a sort of randomly obtained sample. But news, you know, news stuff, political stuff, religious stuff, even though that's a little bit more represented, was surprisingly close, which leads me to believe, you know, when I was looking at some of these samples, whether we need to do some sort of transcript analysis, as was suggested, to get a better sense of the degree or some sort of magnitude for how bad some of these things are. You may also ask me, okay, why don't you just count the number of videos that are related to a topic or something like that? And the problem is that the measurement aspect of this is just really hard. And as you can see, things get deleted all the time. And so counting and saying, okay, this channel has this many videos at one point in time is just not necessarily comparable to what an account looks like at that given point in time. Yeah, happy to elaborate further on that. And I've been talking about usage of AI a lot recently, and so like I wanted to pull, for instance, what some of these shorts are looking like, so you get a sense of what people are experimenting with. And I hope this plays and has the audio, but this is the type of content that is being put out.
What you're doing is very disrespectful to the country, this country. You don't have the cards right now. You're right now not in a very good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having the cards.
Very weird. This content, by the way, I'm having a little bit of echo.
I don't even understand the political position behind this video, to be honest.
No, me neither.
If it's like against it or like if it's an anti-Zelensky or a pro-Zelensky thing.
But this video had like 214K views, and you can see that is a channel that is just MAGA USA. It used to be something completely different before, and this is the type of content that they're putting out for whatever reason.
There's Seco.
Yeah, I don't know why. Okay. Great. So why do we care about all this? I know I've given you sort of a whirlwind and sort of like a very deep dive into some of these things and how we measured, but zooming all the way out, something I hinted at the beginning is that there's this notion, at least we know from some reporting that's been done and sort of like some position pieces and this book by Sam Woolley, that people are using social media accounts to conduct influence operations. Just last fall, the Tenet Media incident, for instance, was very big. We know things like that people are hiring like trad mom influencers to say something about like, or to propel some sort of Republican content. We know that people are using memes to sort of satirize political people and sort of demean them and sort of like subconsciously alter the way that you think about, whether it's Zelensky or Trump or Biden or Kamala Harris, whatever. We see them as memes and we know that, it looks kind of silly, but this is something that's been talked a lot about anecdotally, that it's known here and there that is happening. Now, these accounts, what I'm trying to position here is that they offer as a glimpse, at least into how some of these accounts are operating in the wild. And by looking at these markets, we can find some of how these accounts come to be the way that they are, what their behavior looks like, what their audiences potentially look like, how they harvest the attention of people, and then what do they do afterwards with that attention. And I think it's a really nice space to sort of, that I've been able to find sort of these disinfo outlets, right, that are associated with some of these accounts. And people are clearly deriving some sort of value out of this, such that the ecosystem keeps evolving and more accounts are being put out there. Now, you can also sort of get a glimpse of what the strategies are that are being used to capture attention. So how many of you are familiar with Italian brain rot? Does anybody know what that is? I see 2.5 hands. Good for you.
Italian brain rot?
Sorry?
Like ballerina cappuccina.
Right. If you know what tralala tralala is, then you know what like Italian brain rot is. So you can look it up later. It's very popular. Like you can see that this account has 1.4 million subscribers, just posting 10 hours of this image with fire coming around it and saying tralala tralala. And so, we know that brain rot is becoming more and more of a thing. And I think by going to these, looking at these accounts and how they're trying to sort of harvest attention, is just being kind of interesting to see how we get a lot of kind of like digital pollution, right? Like we get a lot of crap content that is being put out, some in the hopes to hit, algorithmic amplification and get into a lot of people and get a lot of subscribers and so on. And a lot of it doesn't make it, right? And you have just this sort of like crappy bytes on the internet floating around and like polluting things. And so I've been just thinking about this as a way sort of like an externality in terms of like when you're trying to sort of manufacture consensus or sort of create audiences, you're having this externality that is sort of bad quality content or attention grabbing content that is being sort of mass produced, which is really interesting. So for today, the takeaways that I want you to have is that we have a market of, the market for accounts is growing, becoming more sophisticated. We only really talk about YouTube because it allowed us this measurement flexibility. It's happening on TikTok, it's happening on Twitter, it's happening everywhere else as well, on Instagram. This is the tip of the iceberg as well of what we can see in these markets. As you see, there's a lot of these things happening in forums and through private deals and so on. The key point is not that we should say, accounts selling bad, or accounts selling good. There's all sorts of legitimate reasons why accounts are bought and sold. If you're a company and you have a YouTube channel, that's an asset that your company has, and so if you sell your company, you're selling your YouTube channel too. So there's a lot of perfectly valid reasons to sell or buy these accounts. But I think it's a slightly more problematic when you're sort of abusing this residual trust and you're sort of repurposing these accounts into something else, because there's currently no mechanism that sort of alerts you if that channel that you were following all of a sudden becomes something completely different. It just floats on the background of your following, and it pollutes your For You page, and you're none the wiser, right? And so what we can see is that also a lot of these repurposed accounts are indeed used to sort of disseminate problematic content. And so there's this notion in security and privacy that if we just get rid of civils or inorganic or artificial views or bots and so on, we mitigate a lot of the problems in social media platforms, and that we're not really considering so much sort of this attack vector where you can just buy an audience and then all of a sudden put a scam to that audience and have them sort of go into a website that promises them outsized return for their investment and so on. And this happens not only with financial stuff, but there's also looks like some sort of disinformation angle, or at least news angles that some people are using these for. And as you saw in terms of survivability, these accounts seem to be mostly escaping penalties. They're not really getting suspended. They're not really getting banned. They seem to have long and plentiful lives, becoming many different things at many different points in time. Thank you very much.